So welcome back to segment 3 of cloud, emerging technology and platforms and what they mean for public services and governments worldwide. Earlier in this module, we had an introduction to cloud and the evolution of the cloud-based services marketplace. And we then had a bit of a deep dive into platforms and the platform ecosystem business model. In this third segment, we're going to take a bit of a look at emerging technology itself. We've been talking implicitly about a lot of these common, very powerful services that live in the cloud. So let's just take a bit of an example. So Gartner, once again, is rather a useful bellwether, if you like, to have a look at some of these. And it might be a good idea, maybe if you can, to pause this video and just spend a little bit of time having a look at some of the recent emerging technologies. And you can see in this kind of wheel that the areas that you're likely to recognize are in this digital workplace segment on the right-hand side. For obvious reasons, really, because they are the services that touch the most people in the workplace, as opposed to the more technology infrastructure support to the workplace that is often a little bit more invisible. And so it's no surprise that you're going to see in this segment here examples like bots, artificial intelligence. You're going to see some of the exciting new kind of desktop services, virtual assistants, for example, virtual reality, that we're all beginning to get used to, that are emerging as part of this, the emerging technology cloud-based marketplace. And bear in mind, of course, that as this wheel shows, the technologies in the center are more mature, and as we move outwards, we're starting to see some of those technologies in the pipeline that we can expect to start coming forward. So bear in mind again, emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, advanced analytics, optical character recognition, natural language services, geolocation services, robotic process automation, AI, of course, edge computing, examples of the sorts of technologies that live inside the cloud that we addressed in segment 1. And increasingly what that means, I contend, for organisations in public services is we need to start thinking, as I've said before, in terms of common capabilities, these Lego bricks that we can consume everywhere that we started to look at in segment 1. And here's some examples on the left I've pulled out for you of emerging technology capabilities. And I'm sure, again, you'll recognise some of those. And certainly when working with public service organisations, I found it helpful to start with a user need and then say, what capabilities do we require to meet this user need? And then what are some of the ones on the emerging tech side that can help, as well, of course, as some of those standard technology capabilities as well. And in both cases, emerging tech or more standard capabilities, there is no excuse for bespoking these things unless you really need to, unless you have a business justification for it. So that's a kind of a brief look at emerging tech. Bear in mind how fast this market is moving. You may have heard of the Gartner hype cycle, and this is quite a useful piece of terminology, if you like, because it highlights how quickly a lot of these technologies appear, how they are hyped, how people across the industry talk them up, and how quickly then, as you can see, we get to the top of the hype cycle and then we go down into what some people call the valley of despair. And then some of those technologies mature and make it and go into common usage after that. So beware that many of your suppliers may be hyping some of these technologies to you, and that some of these technologies, for example, the ones shown here a few years ago, when we look at a more modern hype cycle, one in 2020, most of those technologies have already vanished. So my caution to you is that emerging tech and cloud-based services are phenomenally powerful, as we've been looking in detail. However, don't fall for some of the hype, and it is very important, I think, to take a considered view about how established and mature some of these technologies really are. Don't just listen to what your suppliers tell you. There's also the ethical side to emerging technology, and in particular, artificial intelligence. And I just wanted to briefly call out a couple of experts on this and what they have to talk about. So Jamie Susskind has recently produced a book called The Digital Republic, which I highly recommend. Jamie is a lawyer, but also an expert on AI and thinking through some of the ethical issues that artificial intelligence presents us with, both now and importantly in the future. He's an academic that I'm very envious of, partly because, of course, he looks like this, rather like the way I look, but also because of his insightful way of looking at the topic. And Jamie Susskind has three very intelligent, it seems to me, things to say about the ethics of the increasing adoption of artificial intelligence. The first is that AI can be expected increasingly to control our access to physical infrastructure. Consider, for example, self-driving cars that don't allow you to, ignore a red traffic light. Or self-driving cars, as he says, that will not permit you to drive near the perimeter of a government site, for example, of high security. We can start to see all sorts of ways in which AI will start literally to limit where we can go and what we can do physically. And that raises issues, of course, about personal freedom. The second element is that he talks about AI acting as a sort of technology filter for our very thoughts. We're very familiar, of course, with social media bubbles as a concept and the way in which increasingly we are fed, often by social media companies, versions of reality in which we are increasingly positioned with other people who share our views. And there have been several studies showing how this comes to polarize human beings' very understanding of the reality that they live in. So increasingly, AI is also filtering our own social and personal realities. And then finally, of course, AI as a form of surveillance. Many organizations and governments are using increasing forms of AI to surveil their citizens. And again, we could put many governments on a spectrum when it comes to this. The important thing is, I think, as a public sector organization, is to be very clear about all three of these effects of artificial intelligence and to start to develop a clear ethics policy in relation to all of these. Because there's no doubt, finally, that all of three of these things together start to have an increasingly disciplinary effect on citizens, where citizens often self-discipline themselves so as not to get into trouble. Think, for example, about credit records and the way in which some of these things can remain on your record virtually and to be called up by all sorts of people in the future that therefore affect the way that you behave, you regulate yourself. So they raise a number of issues for us all. The other big issue often called out around AI is this notion of how we switch things off. Professor Stephen Hawking at Cambridge famously said that he thought that AI, shortly before he died, constituted more of a threat to the future of humanity even than climate change. Certainly, this notion of how we know when to switch things off or how we can have control over the robots is going to become more important for us in public administrations as well. And here, my favourite go-to thinker is Professor Stuart Russell, who has given a number of famous lectures, most recently the BBC Wreath Lectures in 2021, all about some of the ethical issues, in particular for legislators in government, about increasing use of AI. And here, I guess the centre of what he's saying is we always need to ensure that AI is designed so that it continually checks back with its human masters about what continues to be desirable for them. What we don't want to do, of course, is to set a bot or an artificial intelligence kind of unit, if you like, in motion in ways that then enables it to go off by itself and can never be controlled, producing all sorts of dystopian outcomes. Of course, for governments also, there are some very clear ethical issues about AI, including, for example, autonomous weapons that decide which targets to select and operate independently of human control. So that was just a brief aside into some of the inevitable ethical implications for a mature AI policy in governments as well, not just the administrative opportunities. The administrative opportunities, of course, to remind you of a map I showed in the local government video, is of course that as AI increases and possibilities for automation increase, for all public administrations there will be a concomitant challenge to think about the rising tide, as shown on this map, of almost anything, any activity or process or function to which you can attach an algorithm and which can be automated. So which are the areas in public services increasingly where we're just playing Jeopardy, as shown on this map, where we're not really doing anything of any social value because it can now be automated. And how maybe, rather than making everybody redundant, how maybe can we start to transfer a lot of those resources, human capital resources, away from rather dispiriting, depressing, automated and valueless back-end services in public services and towards the frontline public services that make people feel useful and valued in their careers. Also, I think it's important, as I just said, and here's an example of this, to really take a good look, a kind of jaundiced, cynical look, if you like, at some of the benefits that are espoused for emerging technology. So here's an example from the UK government that had a look at distributed ledger, so blockchain technologies. Some of you may remember that 2 or 3 years ago, everybody was talking about blockchain, and many government departments just simply had to have a blockchain project on the go to be seen to be up with the times and to be doing things in an innovative way. And of course, like all governments, the UK government had to take a very kind of close view at the idea that blockchain wasn't yet a proven technology. So run some pilots, start to think about some of the use cases for it, but also don't rush headlong into commissioning expensive, unproven technologies to address use cases that might be served equally well by other simpler technologies as well. And beware, I think, of slides like this, slides that say 67% of government technologists have identified blockchain, for example, as the must-have go-to emerging technology for 2022. It's nonsense. Don't be driven, I would advise you, by those sorts of listicles and the kind of pressure to adopt emerging technology for its own sake. So in conclusion, it's very, very exciting. It's fast-moving. Beware of some of the ethical implications and cognizant of what those are. And also, of course, take a very, very, if you like, measured and balanced view of some of these emerging technologies and what they can do for you.